Welcome back to Human Biology with Dr. B. Today we're talking about the circulatory system. Our previous lecture we talked about the blood, and our next lecture we will talk about the heart. Today specifically we are talking about the blood vessels. But first, an overview. The cardiovascular system has two major components. The first of which is the blood vessels, our topic for today. The blood vessels are extremely important. They take the blood from the heart along with all the nutrients and protein and dissolved ions and hormones, as we talked about in the previous lecture, from the heart to the tissues, distribute this through the tissues and to the tissues, through and to, that is very important, as well as removing waste from the tissues, such as carbon dioxide, metabolic byproducts, etc. The heart is the other portion of the cardiovascular system, which we will be talking about next. But the heart is incredibly important because without the heart, we don't have blood moving through the blood vessels. It applies pressure to the blood. And one of the most important things that I want everyone to understand about the heart is that it doesn't just push blood through the vessels. It is actually a push and a pull. As the blood both pushes on the blood, applies pressure to the blood, as the blood is removed and escapes the heart, it creates a type of vacuum as the blood is pulled back into the heart to be able to be pumped back out to the body. So our blood vessels. We have two major types of blood vessels. We have arteries that take the blood away from the heart. That's how I always remember it. Arteries away. They take blood away from the heart. Three divisions of arteries. First, we have our major elastic muscular arteries. These are the main one being the aorta, coming straight from the heart. These are elastic, which allows them to recoil with a large amount of smooth muscle in order to not explode with the massive power of the heart pushing the blood through those arteries. Then we get to the arterioles, and these are what we refer to as the resistance vessels. We'll talk more about that in a moment. And then we have our tiny little capillaries, and it's the capillaries that reach every tissue in the body. Returning blood to the heart, we have the veins. And we have from the capillaries, we go to the venules, which are almost the equivalent of the arterioles, except different, as we will see. And then we move to the larger veins, such as the inferior and superior vena cava, which enter directly into the heart. So the arterioles are the smallest of the arteries. These maintain and help hold on to the pressure of the blood to make sure the blood gets to every single tissue. Arterioles help control the blood pressure, and they do this by responding to hormones, the nervous system, and to local conditions in that particular area. They do this with the capillaries. The capillaries are just this very tiny microscopic network of blood vessels, of tiny, tiny one-cell thick blood vessels that move to and through each and every one of your tissues. This is where gas exchange and nutrient exchange and waste removal occurs at the capillary level. Now, in order to regulate, we talked about that the arterioles are the gatekeepers of the capillary network. In order to be able to do this, they have these amazing things called precapillary sphincters. Now, on cold days, you might notice that your fingers are the first things to feel it. Your fingers, possibly your nose, and if you're barefoot, your toes. And this has everything to do with the fact that your body wants to maintain homeostasis. It wants to maintain an internal temperature. And the way that they do that, your body does this, is by controlling these precapillary sphincters and by shutting off blood to some of your capillary beds. So that's why when people get cold, their lips turn blue, and their fingers, if you look at them very closely, they do tend to turn more blue because they're not getting a full amount of gaseous exchange through the blood as it moves through the capillaries. And that is just your body's way of saying, hey, I need to keep the blood towards my internal organs to stay warm. It's pretty cool. You can see over here on the left, you can see the endothelial lining of the capillary. It really is one cell thick. And as we talked about the blood cells, this biconcave shape allows them the flexibility to move through the capillaries very, very easily. You can see how the capillaries are lined up and go through each of the tissues. There is a push and a pull through the tissues, especially with the plasma fluid associated with that. And this down here is an actual micrograph of a capillary and the blood cells just lining up, as we call this the rouleau, how they line up together to move through the capillaries. Again, you can see a micrograph over here on the right. And here, I love this. So here's our arteriole, and here's our capillary bed, and here's the venule. And before we get to the capillary beds, before we push the blood through the capillary beds, we have these tiny little clamps. And these are our precapillary sphincters that allow some capillaries to be shut down, as we can see down here on the bottom, and some to remain open. So this is why your lips would turn blue when you're cold, as well as when your fingers start to feel numb, because they're not getting as much blood. They're not staying warm. All the warmth that your blood carries is being shunted towards your internal organs. It's pretty awesome. So how do we regulate blood flow? We have two major ways. We have vasoconstriction and vasodilation. Vasoconstriction, as you can see here on the left, is when the smooth muscle on the internal portion of the artery or the arteriole, it constricts. Now, one of the main differences between arteries and veins, if we scooch back here just a little bit, is you can see that each of these have three major layers. We call it the inner layer. The technical term is the tunica intima. We have the tunica media, and then the tunica externa. Now, the tunica interna is the endothelial lining, and this is continuous from within the heart. The heart is lined with this same endothelial lining as it goes all the way down to the capillaries. It's one continuous layer. It's pretty amazing. Now, the middle layer is what is different between the arteries and the veins. As you can see, the tunica media in the artery has a very large, depending on where the artery is and how close it is to the heart, it has a varied amount of smooth muscle tissue in it. And this smooth muscle tissue is what, as we saw in the last slide, allows for vasoconstriction and vasodilation. This occurs at the arterial level. Over here in the venous system, the veins do have a small smooth muscle layer, but it's not nearly to the extent of the artery. And the reason why is the arteries need to be able to expand and contract very rapidly with the contraction of the heart. If the arteries did not have this very thick, smooth muscle layer, then we would just explode, literally explode. As the heart contracts, that's how much pressure the heart contracts with. As the heart contracts and pushes all of this blood, all of this pressure on the blood, as you can see here, the aorta comes up and around, and this right here, this is the aorta, the ascending and descending, very thick layers of smooth muscle to resist the pressure of the blood, so that literally it doesn't explode. And then you can see down here the capillary. Okay, let's go back to where we were. So vasoconstriction, the smooth layer contracts, reducing blood flow, and vasodilation. The middle layer relaxes, increasing blood flow. Vasoconstriction can happen in response to neurological symptoms, hormonal symptoms, as well as the temperature outside, as we just talked about, depending on what is happening and how your body needs to maintain homeostasis. This will occur. So the pulse. Now, every time we go to the doctor's office, we get our temperature taken, we have our blood pressure taken, and we have our pulse taken. We're going to talk about blood pressure with the heart, but right now we're going to talk about why do the doctors take the pulse? Clearly, I'm sitting here, I am alive. Why are you taking my pulse? Well, first of all, let's go to what is it? What is the pulse? The pulse is a pressure wave created by your heart as the heart contracts and puts pressure on the blood as it moves through the arteries, and it's the response of the arteries to that pressure. So it's this pressure wave as the arteries expand and contract in response to the blood coming in and moving through it. Now, the pulse does not stay the same in one location. So typically we put our fingers on our wrist, as you can see in this figure right here, and we can feel the pulse up, and we can just feel the pulse beat, 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 beat. Well, hopefully your heart isn't beating that fast, otherwise you might be in trouble. But we can feel it. But what we don't understand is that pressure starts, that beat starts all the way at our heart, and you could actually follow the pressure wave of the heartbeat through the pulse as we move from the aorta all the way out to your brachial artery. Pretty cool. So why is it important? Why? Well, first of all, you're alive. It tells you that you're alive. The end. That's the first thing that people check for when you pass out. Hey, do you have a heartbeat? Because that's kind of important, moving the blood to and through your tissues. Why is it important? Well, it tells us how many times your heart is beating in a minute. Now, why is how many times our heart beating in a minute important? Well, it tells us a number of things about what's going on in your body. So, for example, if you're dehydrated, your blood pressure could, or I'm sorry, not your blood pressure, your pulse could increase and become very, what we call tachycardic. It could become very thready and weak, which tells us, hey, there's not a lot for the heart to push on. So the heart is beating really fast in order to move nutrients through all the tissues. And if it's really slow, that tells us that possibly there's a neurological something going on, or maybe your heart isn't working too red hot. Those are technical terms, clearly. So what can affect the pulse? Well, first of all, your level of physical activity, how fit you are. Are you regularly active? If you're not regularly active, you're going to have a higher heart rate. If you are regularly active, typically Olympic athletes, elite athletes, they can have a resting heart rate or a pulse rate of 60 beats per minute or lower. A normal average adult is anywhere over 60, maybe 70 to 90. Anything above that becomes a little bit what we would call more in a rapid heart rate. As well as your age. Babies, when they're first born, they have a heart rate of between 115, that's a little bit low, all the way up to 144. It seems really, really fast for you and I as adults, but for babies, that's necessary. They need to move through their body really quickly. The weather, not joking, the weather can affect your pulse. Is it cold outside? Is the air cold? Is it hot? It's going to affect how fast your heart is going to beat. Also, body position. When you're laying down and relaxing, your heart rate, this is what we talked about with the parasympathetic, your heart rate is going to naturally come down because of the nervous system input that is occurring. Also, your emotions. Hey, are you pissed off? Yeah, your heart rate's going to get higher. Did you just see police lights in your rearview mirror? Yeah, that's going to skyrocket your heart rate real quick. That's called your sympathetic nervous system, your fight or flight, as well as medications that you're on. Sometimes medications can affect your heart rate, increasing your cellular respiration level, increasing your basal metabolic rate. Any of these things can affect your heart rate. And then we move to our venous system. We have two major parts of the venous system. We have the venules and the veins. So we've talked all through the arterial system. We've gone through our arteries, our arterioles, and then we have our capillary bed, and we move to our venules and to our larger capacitance vessels that we call veins. The arteries are resistant vessels. The veins are capacitance. So venules are what occur when capillaries merge. So the capillaries all come together. We have these numerous capillary beds moving through this tissue, and they come together and they form a venule. And multiple venules will come together and form a vein. Now, the veins are what carry the blood directly back to the heart. These have much thinner walls and larger lumens, which means they're just a larger tube, if you will. And the interesting thing about the venous system is, I believe the correct number is about 20% of your blood just kind of hangs out in your venous system normally. We call it the capacitance system, your veins, the capacitance vessels, because they have such a high capacity for storing blood. And this is where a lot of your blood just kind of hangs out day to day, which you may have noticed if you have ever taken a long car trip or taken a long flight and you haven't moved your feet for very long and all of a sudden your feet start swelling. Yeah, that's because your blood, I don't want to say it's pooling, but it is collecting more than normal in your venous system. That's its job, is to hang on to the blood. So how does the blood get back to the heart? So we have realized that the arteries have this massive amount of smooth muscle that allow it to resist the pressure of the heart and to continue the pressure throughout the artery system to the arterioles, to the capillaries, and to perfuse all the tissues. So how does the blood get back through the veins? Because the veins only have a very small smooth muscle layer. They do this through venous valves. Valves prevent backflow of the venous blood to the lower extremities, especially when you're standing up for long periods of time. Now, the cool thing about this is we call this a skeletal muscular pump. Your muscles allow, you can see the valves right here, the venous valves. So as the blood is pulled back up to the heart, these valves prevent backflow and from it pooling all the way in the feet. So what happens here is that the more you contract your muscles, the more the blood is pushed back up to the heart, especially in your legs, because as we know, gravity, it pulls things down. And when gravity is pulling your blood down, we need something to resist it and to push it back up. And the best thing about that is your muscles just moving. This is one of the main reasons why we want everybody to move 30 minutes a day, at least to move, just somewhere, walk, do something, so that we can continue to put afterload on your heart, to put more blood back in your heart, to help maintain your cardiovascular fitness, as well as to just keep the blood moving so it doesn't pool and we don't get edema. Also, blood is moved back. Take a deep breath right now. I'm sure you could get all the wonderful sound effects with that. Now, when you breathe, you have this amazing muscle that contracts and releases, which we'll talk about when we get to the respiratory system, called the diaphragm. And the diaphragm goes all the way through. It goes through from the front of your body all the way to the posterior, all the way to the back. It's this massive muscle all the way that basically delineates your thoracic cavity from your abdominal cavity. Now, this diaphragm, not only does it help you breathe, very important to help you breathe. We will talk about this later. But it also helps put the blood back to the heart, because as you contract, you breathe in, the diaphragm contracts, and then you breathe out, and the diaphragm releases. And that movement of the diaphragm, if you put your hands on your ribs, you can physically feel it. That movement of your diaphragm helps push the blood from your abdominal cavity back up to the heart so that we can continue, to have a heartbeat. It's pretty cool. And that concludes our blood vessel lecture for today. I will see you in class to answer any questions and to do some activities with this information. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks.